Today I have something different for you guys. This special episode is about two pillars of model building philosophies, scratch building and kit building. But that's not it. I will be joined by Dazzy J from Model Railroad Techniques. Say hello to Dazzy J.
Thank you, Kaustav. Hi, everyone. I'm Dazzy J from Model Railroad Techniques. I reached out to Kaustav a few weeks ago to talk about modelling some ships, about a harbour scene that I'm building. That time I was building this beautiful freighter, and it's an Architect coastal freighter built in resin that I'm building for my upcoming harbour. So I'll put a link to the description below.
And those of you who are following my work are already familiar with my Wrightsville Port N-scale layout that you see right here. Now, this layout has a lot of original structures and vessels and cranes that are all built absolutely from scratch following real prototypes.
And that's when we got the idea, why not demonstrate two techniques that come from the philosophies of kit building and scratch building side by side. So we decided to build this little fishing boat. So this fishing boat comes a part of a kit by Carolina Craftsman Kits. And the name of the kit is Nickerson Landing. Before I started the build, I took some photos of the parts with the ruler and sent them to Kaustav.
And I took those reference photos, resized it for N scale, and built this beautiful little boat that you see right here. Yeah? Using nothing but cardboard. Yeah, you heard that right. Cardboard. I also used some other commonly available materials to get all these extra details, and I'll show you how. So today, Dazzy is going to show you how he built a classic fishing boat from an HO scale resin kit, and I'm going to show you how I took that as a reference and rebuilt it in N scale totally from scratch. Let's get started.
So the first step in any resin kit I find is cleaning up all the flashing. So you can see I'm using a needle nose file there. So the next part is I also use the X-Acto blade, that's a blade number 11, just to clean off all that really fine flashings around all the other parts and sections of the boat. I have found spending a little bit of time here cleaning up all this flashing does make a huge big difference when you're trying to, one, these resin kits together, and two, when you're actually trying to colour them all up. So it's just a matter of going through. As you can see, I've gone back in with the needle nose file there, just to make sure all the edges are square and nice, taking all the burrs off and all the excess flashing. I just like to dry fit the parts like I'm doing here, just to make sure that they're all nice and snug before I go and paint them and glue them.
First, I printed the photos that Dazzy had sent over to use as a reference, but lucky for me, that print came to 1:1 dimension of the kit that Dazzy is building. So I just reprinted the photos for N-scale dimensions, which is nothing but scaling the photos to 54% of the original set. Here, you have the HO scale and N-scale equivalent of the print side by side. Cardboard is my main material for this build. These are a mix of hot and cold pressed mound board and watercolor paper of thickness between 0.2 and 1 mm. I cut a small piece of carbon paper and traced the outline of the deck using a sharp pencil on the 0.5 mm cardboard. Then the deck was cut using a sharp hobby knife. The deck was used to measure the length of the keel. I drew the shape and cut the piece out of 1 mm cold pressed mound board. Next, I drew the transom, the bulkheads and the ribs. Since there are no dimensions or drawings, the deck was used to measure the required dimensions at regular interval and draw them freehand on the cardboard. I cut out the transom and then a couple of bulkheads and filed lightly to shape, just like you'd do for wood, plastic or resin. The two bulkheads were glued on the two ends of the open hull. I glued the keel to the bulkheads and then the transom to the deck and the keel. Coming to the ribs, I realized that cutting them out of the 1 mm cardboard will not be possible since the cardboard would disintegrate in that scale. So I'd cut thin 1 mm strips from the 0.2 mm cardboard and use the already drawn dimensions to bend and shape them. Then it's just a matter of gluing them in regular interval. This completes the basic structural elements of the boat. The boat has definitely started taking shape now. Now let's see what Dazzy is up to.
So a very important part is just make sure we clean all the parts with some warm soapy water. That's because obviously all that handling, it's a lot of oil off our hands onto the part, which makes it very hard for the parts to take up paint. Once all parts are washed, it's just a matter of putting them aside to dry before painting.
To plank the boat, I cut out 1mm thin strips out of 0.2mm cardboard. Cut them to shape and glue them in place. For the lower planks, the bow side of the planks needed a gradual reduction to match the curve. I kept shaping the planks and gluing them in place as I moved towards the keel. And there she is. You can call this a boat now. For the wheelhouse, I decided to go for a boxy design as opposed to the curves, keeping the original feel but adapting to my reduced scale and different material. My version of the wheelhouse was drawn on the 0.2mm cardboard based on the photos of the original parts that Dazzy had shared. I started by cutting out the windows using a sharp hobby knife. To create the boards or planks, I lightly run my hobby knife to score the cardboard at 1mm interval. You must be careful to be light-handed, else you would just cut the whole thing instead of scoring it. Notice that I'm doing this before cutting out the components because it is easier to do fine work like this on larger pieces. Once the boards are scored on both sides, the 3 pieces were cut out from the board. To create the window frames and support beams for the wheelhouse, I cut 0.5mm strips out of the 0.2mm board. I simply cut the frames to size and glued them around the windows. A clear acetate sheet was glued in place to simulate glass. On the inside, I glued vertical and horizontal support beams to the sides. Next, I glued the 3 walls to form the pilot house. For the roof, I rounded the corners and glued it in place. And here you go, the wheelhouse is ready for the boat. For the front deck, I'd cut a suitable piece from 0.2mm cardboard and made the planking by scoring my knife on the board. A small trapdoor that gives access to the engine was cut out from 1mm board. Next was easy, simply glue them in place. I also glued a 0.5mm strips on the outer edge of the deck to form the gunnel.
Next step is adding an underprimer from a rattle can. I use either black or grey. So let's get into some spray painting. So what I'm doing there, I'm just misting the colour, the black undercoat ever so lightly as I spin the hull around. Now the hull is actually sitting on a very cheap chopstick there, so I find they're very good and inexpensive to hold the part whilst you're spraying. So you can see with the spray painting there that I've sort of left a little bit of white there. So the reason I do that is when you go in with the spray painting, you don't want to give too thick a coat because that takes away a lot of the details. So you can see what I'm doing there is I've got a black colour out that I've just watered right down. It's like a black sort of wash, and I'm just going through and just picking up the rest of that detail. So that's the detail of the wooden planks on the bottom of the boat. So what I'm going through here is like the tackle box type fixture, and also another little drum that will come up very shortly that it gets stuck to the bottom of the boat. So all I'm doing there is the same black wash. Just want to reiterate why I am actually going through with the black wash like this. So when you put the rattle can undercoat on, you just don't want to go overboard with loading up too much colour into all the nooks and crannies, because what that actually does, that takes away a lot of the detail. So that's why I go back through with a rather thin wash that fills in all the gaps, and we move forward and we're still able to keep all our detail. So this bit was a little bit trial by error. So this is me putting the pilot or the cab together. So it's just a matter of just glued each of the sides together with a little bit of CA glue, and that little black blob at the front there is just some blue tack to sort of hold everything together. Because it's such a little cab, I found it quite difficult to be able to hold it and actually set it in place and get it square.
Before painting, I started looking at photos of some real small fishing boats to select the color scheme that I like. I also started noting down the necessary details that you find in small fishing boats. For the below waterline paint, first I masked the hull above the waterline using 6mm Tamiya masking tape. This makes life a lot easier to maintain the line. I chose a brownish red chalk paint for this part. Chalk acrylic paints dry extra matte and gives a realistic finish. Little Birdie is the brand that is available here in India, but you can use any local equivalent that you find in art supply or hobby stores. As long as the paint gives a matte finish without making it look grainy, it should work fine. I left the paint to cure for a few hours. Then I reversed the method to mask the area below waterline and started painting the rest of the hull above waterline. For this part, I decided to go for white. After removing the masking tape, I did touch up wherever required. I painted the inside of the hull in the same brownish red paint that I used for the below waterline and painted the deck and the inwales white. For the wheelhouse, I chose blue. Notice that I'm deliberately paying attention not to paint it uniformly. This simulates faded paint and gives a weathered look without doing any weathering. Clever, huh? The roof, the window frames, and the inside of the wheelhouse was painted white. I also painted a 1mm strip in grey color and another 0.5mm strip in the same blue I used for the pilot house. I cut the grey boards to size and planked the bottom of the open hull, and the blue strips were used as a support beam below the gunnel, which also acted as a simple embellishment to improve the appearance. Oh, look at that! That definitely looks like an attractive little boat. Now Dazzy will continue to paint the model, and I will add some interesting details as you can see in the finished model right here. But for that, we will head over to Dazzy's model railroad techniques. Now, click on the link here or in the description below, which will take you directly to the part 2 of this video on Dazzy's model railroad techniques, where we will continue with this demonstration. You guys are awesome, and see you guys momentarily.